name is Maisha. I'm a doctoral student and I'm pursuing my PhD in the Science of Psychology, Data and Research in Education program. This is such a pleasure for me to be presenting today on how first-generation college students' conceptual change is influenced by perceived utility value and perceived cost. And my argument will be specifically that motivation isn't just supportive of learning, it determines whether conceptual change is even possible. Well, conceptual change, what is it? So it's the revising deeply held misconceptions, which is also one of the core goals in higher education, especially when it comes to science. But research shows that this kind of learning requires more than just cognitive ability. It requires sustained engagement, persistence through difficulty, and willingness to confront incorrect ideas. Few other scholars have argued that conceptual change is not just purely cognitive, it is also motivational and emotional in nature. If students are not motivated, and if they don't see the value or if they perceive the cost to be too high, then deep learning just does not happen. Now, why this matters? So first generation college students make up over 40% of current entering undergraduate student population in US. Despite this, they experience consistently higher rates of attrition and very low academic performance rates compared to their continuing generation peers. These gaps are often framed in terms of lack of preparedness or effort, but the literature suggests a different framing. First generation college students face structural, social, emotional, and psychological stress, like financial pressure and lack of institutional familiarity and identity threats because they're the first in their family to pursue higher education. And all of these factors shape their academic experience. So the key issue is simply not trying harder. It's whether the motivational conditions are in place for deep learning, like conceptual change to even occur. Conceptual change refers to the process of restructuring prior knowledge into a more accurate scientific framework. According to Posner and colleagues, this requires several conditions such as dissatisfaction with the current ideas. And that creates a need for understanding of the newer concept. And during that process, people are struggling with trying to believe if it's plausible, if it's making meaning, and eventually seeing it as useful or not. So in practice, this means students must first recognize their existing flaws in their thinking and sit with this uncertainty, which eventually causes them cognitive conflict. They actively work to rebuild their knowledge all over again. So this is a very deeply cognitive and emotionally demanding process. And as research suggests that when the effort required feels too costly, students often tend to avoid this and try to approach a surface level, easier strategy to learn. To understand why students engage or don't, I use situated expectancy value theory, SEVT, as a crucial framework. This framework explains that engagement depends on expectancies for success and the subjective task value. And my focus will be on two components of task value, which is utility value and perceived cost. So utility value is when students see the material useful and relevant to their personal life or in real practical world. And perceived cost is when there's costs such as effort, time, loss of opportunities, and psychological stress involved. It's a distinct and very powerful factor influencing engagement. That's what recent research emphasized. So it's not absence of value, rather it is distinct and can coexist to challenge the perceived task value. My central claim is that cost blocks, while perceived utility unlocks conceptual change. Higher perceived cost, whether effort, time, loss of opportunity, or stress disrupts the motivational conditions needed for deeper engagement. This is specifically important because conceptual change requires very, very sustained cognitive effort, deep engagement, and the willingness to struggle. So while this is happening due to perceived cost, the utility value encourages students to invest in that struggle and effort. And studies on utility value intervention suggested that when students see content very relevant to their personal, professional, or communal goals, they often tend to persist in that struggle and continue with the deep engagement of learning. So the combination matters. When the friction is lower and the perceived relevance is higher, it is at that point that conceptual change can occur with optimal motivation. In fact, recent research suggests something really important. While first-generation college students may report similar overall task value, the relationship between motivation and cognitive engagement is very strong in them. In other words, when first-generation college students are motivated, they may in fact engage more deeply compared to their peers. But they also experience very high level of perceived cost over time, and this highlights that their learning is highly shaped by this tension of perceived utility and perceived cost. This reinforces the idea that the issue is not ability or effort. For first generation college students, the main issue is if they have a motivating environment to activate their deep learning. One practical implication is designing instruction that will have intervention to increase perceived utility. Research shows that even brief interventions like having students write about how courses are relevant to their personal or professional and or communal goals can improve engagement and their ability to persist through the struggles that come along with deep learning. Some of the effective strategies look like connecting content to their lived experiences or highlighting how those content materials are connected or relevant to their community overall, and also linking materials to their future use, future goals. There's also evidence that combining personal and pro-social goals and relevance, such as the value they see for both themselves and for others, can, in combined scenario, be more effective. And there's also evidence that the timing matters. So if there's earlier semester interventions, then this could lead to prevention of declining in motivation, especially for gateway courses like science-based gateway courses. Another prevention could look like reducing perceived cost. So this intervention is very important to consider. First-generation college students often experience a higher need for engagement, and they also perceive lack of opportunity and psychological costs negatively, which can increase over time, and it can lead to their engagement to fall. So it affects their overall academic performance. To recognize that, instructors can support learning by lowering unnecessary barriers, such as making office hour visits more welcoming and accessible, and also normalizing their shared struggles to foster belongingness and be extra clear and provide more scaffolding for assignments and just course content in general. They need that extra support. Research showed that with the cost reduction interventions, significant academic outcomes were achieved, and especially for lower performing students. These strategies don't reduce rigor, they just make studying more equitable, and for first generation college students, their engagement can be more sustainable. So to conclude, conceptual change depends not just on what students know, but on whether they're motivating to engage in the process. For first generation college students, utility value and perceived cost act as key gatekeepers for their motivational conditions. And if we want to support equitable deep learning for first generation college students, then we do need to design environments that increase relevance, reduce unnecessary cost, because when the conditions are right, the students are optimally motivated and are fully capable of deep learning. These are my references, and thank you.